My daughter-in-law inherited $55 million after my son passed away. The first thing she did was throw me out of the house he and I built together. She told me to go die in a dumpster. I simply picked up my coat, walked away, and made a single phone call. 5 days later, she was on her knees begging me for a single dollar. She should have listened more carefully when the will was read. She should have realized my son knew exactly who she was. Before I continue, let me know where you are listening from in the comments below. And please like this video and subscribe to the channel if you believe that wisdom and patience are the most powerful weapons. My name is Robert, and for most of my life I was just a regular man. I worked as a high school history teacher, the kind who wore tweed jackets and told bad puns about the Roman Empire. My wife, Linda, passed away when our son David was just 12. From that moment on, it was just the two of us against the world. We weren't rich, but we had each other, and that was enough. David was my pride and joy. He was the kind of kid who took apart the family coaster just to see how it worked, then put it back together better than before. He grew up to be a tech genius, the founder of a company that started in our garage and ended up changing the world. I was there for every late-night coding session, every failed prototype, every small victory. When he finally made it big, he didn't forget where he came from. He bought us a house, a beautiful, sprawling place on the edge of town. But he insisted we build it together, brick by brick, so it would always feel like home. That house was more than just wood and stone. It was a living memory of our journey, a testament to the bond between father and son. Every corner held a story. The kitchen where we burned our first Thanksgiving turkey, the library where we argued about whether Asimov or Tolkien was the better writer, the backyard where we planted an oak tree in Linda's memory. It was our sanctuary. Then, David met Chloe. Chloe was everything David wasn't: polished, ambitious, and always looking for the next big thing. She worked in finance, and from the moment she entered our lives, I felt a chill in the air. She was charming, yes, but there was something about her smile that never quite reached her eyes. Still, David was smitten, and I wanted him to be happy. I tried to welcome her, to make her feel like part of the family. I even gave her my mother's wedding ring when David proposed, hoping it would bridge the gap between us. For a while, things seemed fine. Chloe and David threw lavish parties, traveled the world, and posted their perfect lives on social media. But behind closed doors, cracks began to show. Chloe rarely spoke to me unless she needed something. She rolled her eyes at my stories, dismissed my advice, and treated the house like her personal showroom. Still, I kept my peace. For David's sake, I tried to believe that family drama was just a phase, that we'd find common ground eventually. But deep down, I knew something was wrong. There were whispers of workplace betrayal at David's company, rumors that Chloe was pushing him to sell out to the highest bidder. David brushed it off, saying Chloe was just ambitious. I wanted to believe him, but the tension in the house was growing thicker by the day. Then, everything changed. David was diagnosed with a rare form of cancer. It was aggressive, relentless, and within 6 months, he was gone. The grief was suffocating. I lost not just my son, but my best friend, my partner in every family conflict, my reason for getting up in the morning. The house felt empty, haunted by memories of laughter and love that now seemed impossibly distant. Chloe, on the other hand, seemed almost relieved. She moved through the house with a cold efficiency, making calls, arranging meetings, and talking about liquidating assets before David was even on the ground. I tried to give her the benefit of the doubt. Maybe she was just coping in her own way. But the truth was, she was already planning her next move. The day after David's funeral, I found Chloe in the living room, dressed in a designer suit, her phone glued to her ear. She didn't even look up when I entered. I overheard her talking about the estate, about maximizing liquidity, and accelerating the timeline. My heart sank. I realized then that I was no longer a part of her plans. I was just an obstacle to be removed, but I still had hope. I believed that, despite everything, Chloe would honor David's memory, that she would respect the home we built together. I was wrong. Little did I know, the real betrayal was just around the corner. The morning after David's funeral, the house was eerily silent. I woke up before dawn, unable to sleep, and wandered through the halls, touching the walls we'd painted together, the photographs of happier times. I tried to find comfort in the familiar, but everything felt wrong. The air was heavy, thick with the kind of grief that makes every breath a struggle. I made my way to the kitchen, hoping a cup of coffee might steady my nerves. That's when I heard voices: Chloe's, sharp and businesslike, and another, unfamiliar, low and professional. I paused in the hallway listening. Chloe was talking to a man in a tailored suit, a real estate agent. She was already discussing the sale of the house. "I want it listed immediately," she said, her tone icy. "No sentimental delays. The market's hot and I want top dollar. My late husband's father is still here, but he'll be gone by the end of the week." The words hit me like a punch to the gut. I felt the blood drain from my face. I wasn't even cold in my grief, and she was already erasing me from the only home I had left. I stepped into the kitchen, trying to keep my voice steady. "Chloe, what's going on?" I asked, my hands trembling. She didn't even flinch. She turned to me, her eyes cold and unfeeling. "Robert, you need to pack your things. The house is mine now. David left everything to me. You can stay at a motel until you figure out your next move." I stared at her, unable to process what I was hearing. "This is my home. David and I built it together. He would never want me to leave." She shrugged, as if my pain was an inconvenience. "David's gone. Things change. I have plans for this place, and you're not part of them. I'm being generous by giving you a few days. Don't make this harder than it needs to be." The real estate agent avoided my gaze, shuffling his papers awkwardly. I felt humiliated, like a piece of old furniture being thrown out with the trash. The betrayal was complete. Chloe wasn't just taking my home, she was erasing my entire existence. I tried to reason with her, to appeal to whatever shred of decency she might have left. "Chloe, please. I have nowhere else to go. This house is all I have." She rolled her eyes, her lip curling into a sneer. "That's not my problem. Maybe you should have thought about that before you let David sign everything over to me. You're not my responsibility." The words stung, but what hurt even more was the realization that David had trusted her. He believed she would do the right thing, that she would honor his wishes. Instead, she was using his death as an opportunity for petty revenge, a chance to rewrite history and claim everything for herself. I spent the next few days in a daze, packing my belongings into boxes, each item a painful reminder of what I was losing. Chloe watched me with a cold detachment, barking orders to the movers, making calls to decorators and contractors. She was already planning renovations, eager to erase every trace of David and me from the house. The final blow came when I found her in the library, the room David and I had built with our own hands. She was on the phone with an interior designer, discussing how to modernize the space. "All this dark wood and old books, it's depressing," she said. "I want to get it. White walls, glass shelves, maybe a juice bar. Get rid of everything that looks old." I couldn't take it anymore. I stepped into the room, my voice shaking with anger. This was David's sanctuary. "You can't just destroy it." If you looked at me with a mixture of pity and contempt. "It's my house now, Robert. If you don't like it, you know where the door is." That night, I sat alone in my empty bedroom, surrounded by boxes and memories. I felt utterly defeated, a casualty of toxic family drama and broken trust. The pain was overwhelming, but beneath it, a new emotion began to take root. Not the wild, destructive kind, but a cold, focused fury. Chloe thought she had won, that she could rewrite the past and claim victory. But she had underestimated me. As I lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, I realized I had a choice. I could let her destroy everything David and I had built, or I could fight back. I didn't know how yet, but I knew one thing for certain: I wasn't going to let her get away with it. I remembered all the stories I'd read about family conflicts, betrayal, and revenge. Those emotional storytelling moments where the underdog rises up. I never thought I'd be living one of those pro-revenge stories myself. But as I looked around at the empty room, I realized that sometimes justice served isn't just a fantasy. Sometimes it's a necessity. But little did they know I wasn't going to stay broken for long. The next morning I woke up before sunrise, the ache in my chest sharper than ever. I sat on the edge of the bed, staring at the battered suitcase Chloe had tossed at my feet. It was the same one I'd used on my honeymoon with Linda, the same one David had borrowed for his first business trip. Now it was a symbol of everything I'd lost: my home, my family, my sense of belonging. I felt like a ghost haunting the ruins of my own life. I shuffled to the window and looked out at the backyard. The oak tree David and I had planted years ago stood tall, its branches swaying gently in the morning breeze. I remembered the day we dug the hole together, our hands covered in dirt, our laughter echoing across the yard. That tree was supposed to be a living legacy, a reminder that even in the face of loss, something beautiful could grow. Now, it felt like a gravestone. I wandered through the house one last time, running my fingers along the banister, pausing in the kitchen where David and I had shared countless late-night talks. Every room was filled with memories, but Chloe's presence had turned them sour. The movers were already at the door, their faces blank and professional. They didn't care about the family drama unfolding before them. To them, I was just another old man being pushed out of his home. As I loaded the last box into my car, Chloe appeared in the doorway, arms crossed, a satisfied smirk on her face. "Don't forget your medication," she said, her voice dripping with false concern. "Wouldn't want you to have a heart attack on the way out." I bit back a retort, refusing to give her the satisfaction of seeing me break. Instead, I nodded, my jaw clenched tight. "Goodbye, Chloe," I said quietly. "I hope you find what you're looking for." She didn't respond. She just turned on her heel and disappeared back into the house, already barking orders at the contractors. I stood there for a moment, the weight of her betrayal settling over me like a shroud. I felt humiliated, discarded, and utterly alone. I drove away from the house in a daze, my mind racing with thoughts of revenge, justice, and karma. I'd read enough betrayal stories to know that sometimes the only way to heal is to fight back. But I wasn't sure I had the strength. I was just an old man, outmatched and outmaneuvered by someone younger, richer, and far more ruthless. I checked into a cheap motel on the edge of town, the kind of place where no one asks questions and everyone minds their own business. The room was small and dingy, the air thick with the scent of stale cigarettes and regret. I sat on the bed staring at the faded wallpaper, wondering how my life had unraveled so quickly. That night, I couldn't sleep. I replayed every moment of the past few weeks in my mind, searching for answers. How had Chloe managed to take everything from me? Why had David trusted her so completely? Was there something I'd missed? Some warning sign I'd ignored? As the hours dragged on, my anger grew. I thought about all the times I'd put others first, all the sacrifices I'd made for my family. I thought about the years I'd spent building a life with David, only to have it ripped away by someone who saw me as nothing more than an inconvenience. The more I thought about it, the more determined I became. I wasn't going to let Chloe win. I wasn't going to let her rewrite the story of my life. I pulled out my phone and scrolled through my contacts, my finger hovering over the name of David's lawyer, Mr. Harris. He'd been a family friend for years, someone I trusted implicitly. If anyone could help me, it was him. I hesitated for a moment, my heart pounding in my chest. Was I really ready to fight back? Was I prepared to go to war with my own daughter-in-law? I thought about all the pro-revenge stories I'd read online, the ones where the underdog rises up and takes back what's rightfully theirs. I realized that I didn't have a choice. If I wanted justice, if I wanted to honor David's memory, I had to act. With trembling hands, I dialed Mr. Harris's number. The phone rang twice before he picked up, his voice warm and reassuring. "Robert, is everything okay?" I took a deep breath, steadying myself. "No, everything's not okay. I need your help. Chloe, she's thrown me out of the house. She's selling everything. I don't know what to do." There was a pause on the other end of the line, then a quiet sigh. I was afraid this might happen. "Listen, Robert, I want you to come to my office, first thing in the morning. We'll go over everything together. You're not alone in this." For the first time in days, I felt a glimmer of hope. Maybe there was a way out of this nightmare. Maybe, just maybe, I could turn the tables on Chloe and show her that she... It was time to fight back, and that's when I discovered the perfect way to ruin them. The next morning, I arrived at Mr. Harris's office just as the sun was rising, painting the city in a golden haze. The building was quiet, the kind of place where secrets are kept and lives are changed. I sat in the waiting room, my hands shaking, my mind replaying every moment of Chloe's betrayal. I was nervous, but beneath the anxiety was a growing sense of purpose. I was ready to fight for what was rightfully mine. Mr. Harris greeted me with a firm handshake and a look of genuine concern. He led me into his office, a warm, wood-paneled room, lined with books and family photos. He poured me a cup of coffee and listened patiently as I told him everything about David's illness, Chloe's coldness, the way she'd thrown me out without a second thought. I could see the anger flicker in his eyes as I described her cruelty. When I finished, he leaned back in his chair, steepling his fingers. "Robert, I'm so sorry you're going through this. But I want you to know you're not powerless. There are ways to fight back, even when it feels like you've lost everything." I nodded, desperate for hope. "What can I do?" "She has all the money, the house, everything." "David's will left it all to her." Mr. Harris smiled, a glint of determination in his eyes. "Wills aren't always as simple as they seem. Sometimes there are clauses that must be met, and sometimes people like Chloe get so greedy, they make mistakes." He pulled out a thick folder and began flipping through documents. I handled David's estate planning personally. He was meticulous, always thinking 3 steps ahead. He wanted to make sure you were taken care of, no matter what happened. There's a clause in the will, a fiduciary duty clause. It states that the inheritor must act in the best interest of the family and preserve the legacy of the estate for a probationary period. If that duty is violated, the will can be contested, and the assets can be frozen. My heart skipped a beat. I mean, if Chloe's actions can be proven to violate that duty, she could lose everything? He nodded, exactly. But we need evidence. We need to show that she's acting out of spite, not in the best interest of the family. The way she threw you out, the way she's selling the house, erasing David's memory, those are all violations. But we need documentation, witnesses, paper trails. A plan began to form in my mind, slow and methodical, like the best pro-revenge stories I'd ever read. I would gather evidence. I would document every cruel word, every selfish act. I would show the world who Chloe really was. Over the next few days, I became a ghost in my own life, quietly collecting proof of Chloe's betrayal. I spoke to the movers, the real estate agent, even the contractors she'd hired to gut the library. I asked them to write statements to describe what they'd seen and heard. Most were sympathetic, shocked by her callousness. They agreed to help, their words painting a picture of a woman consumed by greed and ambition. Also reach out to David's old friends and colleagues, people who knew the truth about his marriage. Some shared stories of Chloe's manipulations, how she'd tried to push David into selling his company, how she'd isolated him from his friends, how she'd treated everyone around her like disposable pawns. Each story was another piece of the puzzle, another nail in the coffin of her reputation. Meanwhile, Mr. Harris began the legal process of contesting the will. He filed motions to freeze the estate's assets, citing the fiduciary duty clause and the mounting evidence of Chloe's violations. The process was slow, filled with paperwork and court dates, but with every step, I felt a little stronger. I was no longer a victim of family conflict. I was a man on a mission, determined to see justice served, but the plan wasn't without its risks. Chloe was smart, and she had powerful lawyers of her own. There were moments when I doubted myself, when I wondered if I was in over my head. What if she found out what I was doing? What if she managed to cover her tracks, to spin the story in her favor? The thought kept me up at night, my mind racing with worst-case scenarios. Till I pressed on. I knew that the only way to win was to be patient, to let Chloe dig her own grave. I watched from the shadows as she spent money recklessly, throwing lavish parties, buying designer clothes, and flaunting her newfound wealth on social media. She was so blinded by her own arrogance that she didn't see the trap closing around her. Every time she posted a photo of herself in the house, every time she bragged about her new life, she was providing more evidence of her disregard for David's legacy. I saved every post, every comment, every receipt. I'd built a case so airtight that not even her army of lawyers could break it. But the hardest part was waiting. I wanted to confront her, to scream at her for everything she'd done. But I knew that real revenge, the kind that lasts, requires patience. I had to let her believe she'd won. Let her grow comfortable in her stolen kingdom. And so I waited, biding my time, watching as Chloe's world grew bigger and more fragile with every passing day. I knew that when the time was right, all it would take was a single push to bring it crashing down. But when the day finally came, everything changed. The day of reckoning arrived on a gray, drizzling Thursday. One of those mornings where the world feels heavy and expectant, as if it knows something monumental is about to happen. I woke up early, my nerves buzzing with anticipation. For weeks, I'd been gathering evidence, building my case, and watching Chloe parade around as if she were untouchable. But now, the tables were about to turn. Mr. Harris called me just after sunrise. "It's time, Robert," he said, his voice steady and calm. "The judge has agreed to an emergency hearing. Chloe will be served with the injunction this morning. She won't see it coming." I dressed carefully, choosing the suit David had bought me for his wedding. It felt like armor, a reminder of better days and the promise I'd made to protect his legacy. As I drove to the courthouse, I replayed every moment of Chloe's betrayal in my mind, the cold dismissal, the smug smile, the way she'd gutted our home without a second thought. I felt a surge of righteous anger, but also a deep, quiet satisfaction. This was more than just revenge. It was justice served. The courthouse was bustling with activity. Lawyers and clerks hurrying through the halls, the air thick with the scent of old paper and anticipation. I met Mr. Harris outside the courtroom, his briefcase bulging with documents. He gave me a reassuring nod. "We have everything we need. Just let me do the talking." Inside, Chloe sat at the defendant's table, flanked by her high-priced attorneys. She looked as polished as ever, but there was a flicker of uncertainty in her eyes. She hadn't expected a fight. She certainly hadn't expected me to fight back. The judge entered, and the room fell silent. Mr. Harris presented our case with calm precision, laying out the evidence of Chloe's violations, her reckless spending, her attempts to erase David's memory, her callous eviction of the only other family member. He read statements from the movers, the contractors, even a real estate agent who'd been appalled by her lack of empathy. He showed screenshots of her social media posts, each one a testament to her disregard for the family legacy she was supposed to protect. Chloe's lawyers tried to argue that she was simply moving on, that her actions were within her rights as the inheritor. But the judge was unmoved. He listened carefully, his expression growing grimmer with every new piece of evidence. When Mr. Harris finished, the judge turned to Chloe. His voice turned. Double quotes, "Mrs. Carter, the will you inherited was not a blank check. It came with responsibilities you have clearly violated. Effective immediately, all assets of the estate are frozen pending further review. You are prohibited from selling, altering, or disposing of any property until this matter is resolved." The color drained from Chloe's face. For the first time, she looked truly afraid. Her lawyers whispered frantically, but it was too late. The damage was done. As we left the courtroom, Mr. Harris clapped me on the shoulder. "You did it, Robert. She can't touch a dime until the court decides. And with the evidence we have, I doubt she'll see a penny." But the real climax came later that afternoon when Chloe tried to access her accounts. I heard about it from the bank manager, an old friend of David's who'd always looked out for our family. Chloe had stormed into the branch, demanding access to the estate funds. When the teller explained that the accounts were frozen by court order, she lost her composure completely, screaming, threatening lawsuits, insisting that she was the rightful owner. The scene was so dramatic that it made its way around town within hours. People who had once envied Chloe's wealth now whispered about her downfall. The woman who had strutted through life with an air of superiority was now the subject of gossip and pity. It was the kind of poetic justice you only see in the most satisfying stories. But I wasn't finished yet. With the injunction in place, Mr. Harris and I began the process of petitioning the court to have the will amended. We argued that Chloe's actions constituted a catastrophic breach of fiduciary duty, and that the estate should be placed in a trust, one that I would oversee, dedicated to preserving David's legacy and supporting causes he cared about. The legal battle was fierce, but the evidence was overwhelming. Chloe's own arrogance had been her undoing. Every cruel word, every selfish act, every public display of greed had been documented and presented to court. She tried to play the victim, but no one was buying it. The final hearing was a formality. The judge ruled in our favor, stripping Chloe of her inheritance and placing the estate in a charitable trust. She was left with nothing but the clothes on her back and the bitter taste of defeat as I walked out of the courthouse for the last time. I felt a weight lift from my shoulders. I had avenged David's memory, restored justice, and reclaimed my place in the world. Chloe, on the other hand, had lost everything. Her money, her status, her power. She was just another casualty of her own toxic relationships and broken trust. But the story wasn't over yet. The courthouse doors closed behind me, and for the first time in months, I felt the crisp air fill my lungs without the weight of dread pressing down on my chest. The battle was over, but the echoes of family conflict and betrayal still lingered in my mind. I walked slowly down the courthouse steps, each stride feeling lighter, as if I was finally stepping out from under a storm cloud that had followed me since David's passing. I returned to the motel that had become my temporary refuge. The room was still small and unremarkable, but it no longer felt like a prison. Instead, it was a place of transition, a waiting room between the pain of the past and the promise of a new beginning. I sat on the edge of the bed, staring at the battered suitcase that had carried the last remnants of my old life. For the first time, I didn't feel anger or humiliation. I felt relieved. News of the court's decision spread quickly. In a town where everyone knew everyone else's business, Chloe's downfall became the talk of every coffee shop and grocery store. People who had once envied her now shook their heads in disbelief, whispering about how karma had finally caught up with her. The same neighbors who had watched me leave my home in shame now greeted me with nods of respect and quiet words of support. It was a strange, bittersweet kind of justice, one that didn't erase the pain, but made it easier to bear. Chloe, on the other hand, was nowhere to be seen. She vanished from social circles, her phone calls went unanswered, and her once busy social media accounts fell silent. The woman who had once flaunted her wealth and power was now a ghost, haunted by the consequences of her own actions. I heard rumors that she'd tried to appeal the court's decision, but her lawyers had abandoned her when it became clear she couldn't pay their fees. She was left alone, stripped of her fortune and her friends, forced to confront the reality she had created. I spent the next few weeks working with Mr. Harris to set up the charitable trust in David's name. We pored over documents, met with financial advisors, and reached out to organizations that supported causes David had cared about. STEM education for underprivileged kids, scholarships for aspiring engineers, and grants for cancer research. Every decision felt like a step toward healing, a way to turn tragedy into something meaningful. The trust became more than just a legal entity. It became a living tribute to David's legacy, a way to ensure that his spirit would continue to make a difference in the world. As the trust took shape, I moved out of the motel and into a modest apartment on the edge of town. It wasn't the house David and I had built, but it was mine. I filled it with photos of Linda and David, mementos from our travels, and shelves lined with the books we'd loved. I found comfort in the routine of daily life, morning walks in the park, afternoons volunteering at the local library, evenings spent reading by the window. The pain of loss was still there, but it was no longer the center of my world. One afternoon, as I was sorting through a box of old letters, I received a call from the director of a local youth center. She wanted to thank me for the donation the trust had made, explaining how it would fund a new computer lab for the kids. Her gratitude was genuine, her voice filled with hope. For the first time since David's death, I felt a sense of purpose, a reason to keep moving forward. But karma wasn't finished with Chloe. Months after the court's decision, I ran into her at the grocery store. She looked nothing like the woman I remembered. Her hair was unstyled, her clothes plain, her eyes tired and weary. She avoided my gaze, but I could see the shame etched into every line of her face. She was working as a cashier, scattering groceries for people who had once envied her. The irony wasn't lost on me. She had traded a life of luxury for one of quiet consequence, forced to confront the reality of her own choices every single day. I didn't gloat or offer words of revenge. Instead, I simply nodded and wished her well, I realized then that true justice isn't about inflicting pain. It's about restoring balance, about making sure that those who betray trust and family are held accountable. Chloe's suffering was her own doing, the inevitable result of her toxic relationships and broken trust. As I walked out of the store, I felt a sense of closure. The cycle of betrayal and revenge had finally come to an end. I had lost a son, a home, and a sense of security, but I had gained something far more valuable: a renewed sense of self, a purpose rooted in love and legacy, and the knowledge that even in the darkest moments, justice can be served. But as I settled into my new life, I couldn't help but wonder, was this truly the end? Or was there another chapter waiting to be written? The days that followed were quieter, but not empty. I found myself reflecting on everything that had happened: the betrayal, the courtroom battles, the slow, methodical execution of justice. I realized that while the legal fight was over, the emotional scars of family drama and broken trust would take much longer to heal. Still, I was determined not to let bitterness define the rest of my life. I threw myself into the work of the trust. Every week I met with local organizations, reviewed grant applications, and visited schools where David's scholarships were making a difference. The gratitude I saw in the eyes of students and teachers was a balm for my soul. It reminded me that even the most painful revenge stories can lead to something good, that sometimes the best payback is building a legacy that outlasts the people who tried to destroy you. But as the months passed, I began to notice strange things happening around me. At first it was small. An anonymous letter slipped under my door, warning me to watch my back. A series of phone calls in the middle of the night, the caller hanging up as soon as I answered. I tried to brush it off as a prank, the kind of petty revenge you sometimes see in toxic relationships. But a nagging sense of unease crept in. One evening, as I was leaving a board meeting for the trust, I noticed a car idling across the street. Its headlights were off, but I could see the silhouette of someone watching me. I quickened my pace, my heart pounding. Was it Chloe? Had she finally snapped, unable to accept the consequences of her actions? Or was it someone else with a grudge against the Peterson family, still nursing old wounds from the days when David's company was making headlines? I reported the incidents to the police, but there was little they could do without concrete evidence. Still, the sense of being watched lingered, casting a shadow over my newfound peace. I started double-checking the locks on my doors, glancing over my shoulder whenever I walked down the street. The paranoia was exhausting, but I refused to let it control me. Instead, I focused on the trust, pouring my energy into making it a force for good. One organized a community event, a technology fair for the local kids, complete with workshops, guest speakers, and hands-on activities. The turnout was incredible. Parents thanked me for giving their children opportunities they'd never had before. For a moment, the worries faded, replaced by the simple joy of seeing David's legacy come alive, but the sense of unfinished business remained. I couldn't shake the feeling that Chloe or someone connected to her wasn't done with me yet. I started digging into her recent activities, using the same methodical approach that had helped me gather evidence during the court case. What I found surprised me. Chloe had been trying to rebuild her life, but everywhere she turned, doors were closed. Her reputation was in tatters, her credit ruined, her social circle gone. She'd applied for jobs in finance, but no one would hire her. The story of her downfall had spread far beyond our small town, becoming a cautionary tale in online forums and even making its way into a few true story revenge threads on Reddit. The internet never forgets, and Chloe's name had become synonymous with betrayal stories and family conflict. Still, I couldn't help but feel a pang of sympathy. As much as I wanted to see justice served, I didn't want to see her destroyed. I wondered if there was a way to help her find redemption, to break the cycle of toxic family drama that had consumed us both. But every time I considered reaching out, I remembered the look in her eyes the day she threw me out, the cold certainty that she would never see me as anything but an obstacle. One night, as I was locking up the office after a late meeting, I heard footsteps behind me. I turned, my heart racing, only to see a young woman standing in the shadows. She looked nervous, clutching a folder to her chest. "Are you Mr. Peterson?" she asked, her voice trembling. I nodded, leery but curious. "Yes, can I help you?" She stepped forward, holding out the folder. "My name is Emily. I used to work for Chloe. I saw what she did to you, and I couldn't stay silent anymore. There are things you need to know that might change everything." I took the folder, my hand shaking. Inside were documents, emails, and financial records, evidence of things I had known about. As I flipped through the pages, a new wave of anger and disbelief washed over me. Chloe's betrayal had been even deeper than I realized. There were hidden accounts, secret deals, and a web of lies that stretched back years. I looked up at Emily, my mind racing. "Why are you giving me this now?" She hesitated, then said quietly, "Because I believe in justice, and because I think you deserve to know the whole truth." As I stood there, clutching the folder, I realized that my story wasn't over. There were still secrets to uncover, still wrongs to be righted. The cycle of betrayal and revenge wasn't finished, not yet. I spent the rest of that night poring over the documents Emily had given me. Each page was a revelation, a new layer of betrayal that made my earlier pain feel almost naive. There were emails between Chloe and a shadowy group of investors, messages that hinted at backroom deals and secret transfers of money. There were bank statements showing large sums being funneled out of David's accounts months before he died, money that had never been accounted for in the estate. There were even contracts with signatures I didn't recognize, agreements that seemed to benefit Chloe and her associates, at the expense of the company David had built from nothing. The more I read, the more I realized that Chloe's betrayal wasn't just personal, it was criminal. She hadn't just broken my trust or violated the terms of the will. She had orchestrated a complex scheme of financial manipulation and fraud. This wasn't just a family conflict anymore. It was a full-blown legal and ethical disaster, the kind of story that would make headlines if it ever came to light. I called Mr. Harris first thing in the morning, my voice shaking with a mix of anger and adrenaline. "You need to see this," I told him. "It's bigger than we thought. Chloe didn't just steal from me, she stole from David, from his company, from everyone who ever believed in him." He met me at my apartment within the hour, his face growing graver with every page he read. "This is serious, Robert. If this gets out, it could mean criminal charges. We need to be very careful." We spent the next few days gathering more evidence, cross-referencing the documents with public records and company files. Emily proved to be an invaluable ally, guiding us through the maze of Chloe's deception. She explained how Chloe had used her position as David's wife to gain access to sensitive information, how she'd manipulated board members and pressured accountants to look the other way. It was a classic case of workplace betrayal, but with stakes that reached far beyond the office. As the case grew, so did the risks. I started receiving more anonymous threats, emails warning me to drop it or face the consequences. My car was vandalized one night, but tires slashed and a note left on the windshield. "You're playing with fire." The police took my complaints seriously, but without concrete evidence of who was behind the threats, there was little they could do. But despite the danger, I pressed on. I knew that exposing Chloe's crimes was the only way to truly serve justice, not just for myself, but for David, for his company, and for everyone who had been hurt by her greed. The story had become bigger than a simple revenge tale. It was now about righting a systemic wrong, about holding the powerful accountable for their actions. Mr. Harris and I prepared a detailed report and submitted it to the authorities. The investigation that followed was swift and thorough. Detectives interviewed former employees, subpoenaed financial records, and traced the flow of money through a labyrinth of shell companies and offshore accounts. The evidence was overwhelming. Chloe was arrested on charges of fraud, embezzlement, and conspiracy. Her associates were rounded up as well, their carefully constructed web of lies unraveling in the harsh light of day. The news broke like a thunderclap. Headlines screamed about the Peterson family scandal, and Chloe's face was plastered across every local news channel. The same people who had once envied her now watched in shock as she was led away in handcuffs, and her empire of deceit crumbling around her. The story became a cautionary tale, a warning about the dangers of unchecked ambition and the consequences of betraying those who trust you. But even as the legal system moved to hold Chloe accountable, I felt a strange sense of emptiness. I had won, yes, justice had been served, and karma had finally caught up with her. But the victory felt hollow. The cost of this pro-revenge story had been high. My family was gone, my home lost, and the wounds of betrayal still raw. I'd tried to focus on the good that had come from it all. The scholarships, the community programs, the lives changed by David's legacy. But late at night, when the world was quiet, I couldn't help but wonder if there was more I could have done. Could I have seen the signs earlier? Could I have protected David from Chloe's toxic influence? The questions haunted me, lingering like ghosts in the corners of my mind. One evening, as I was closing up the office, Emily stopped by with an envelope. "There's one more thing you should see," she said, her voice hesitant. Inside was a letter written by David, dated just weeks before his death. As I unfolded the paper, my hands trembling, I realized that this story wasn't finished. There were still secrets left to uncover, still truths waiting to be revealed. I sat at my desk, the envelope trembling in my hands. The sight of David's handwriting, so familiar, so achingly personal, brought a lump to my throat. For a long moment, I just stared at it, afraid to open it, afraid of what truths it might contain. But I knew I had to face whatever was inside. I owed it to David, to myself, and to everyone who had been caught in the crossfire of this family drama. I unfolded the letter, the paper soft and worn from being handled. David's words leapt off the page, raw and honest, filled with the kind of vulnerability he rarely showed in person. "Dad," it began, "if you're reading this, it means things didn't go the way I hoped. I want you to know that I love you, and I'm sorry for any pain my choices have caused. I know you never trusted Chloe, and I can't blame you. I wanted to believe she could change, that love would be enough to heal whatever was broken inside her. But I was wrong." I paused, my eyes stinging with tears. The pain of betrayal, the ache of loss, all came rushing back. But I kept reading, needing to hear my son's voice one more time. "I tried to protect you, Dad. I set up the will with as many safeguards as I could, but I knew Chloe was clever. If she found a way around them, I'm sorry. I hope you found Mr. Harris knows what to do. I also hope you found the strength to fight back. You always taught me that justice matters. That family is worth protecting, even when it hurts." The letter went on, detailing things I hadn't known: how Chloe had pressured him to sell the company, how she'd isolated him from friends, how she'd manipulated every situation to her advantage. David had seen the signs, but he'd been too hopeful, too trusting. He'd wanted to believe in redemption, even when all the evidence pointed to betrayal. But then, the letter took a turn. "There's something else you need to know," David wrote. "Chloe wasn't working alone. There's someone else, someone from the company, someone I once trusted. I couldn't prove it before I got sick, but I left clues. Check the files on my old laptop, the one in the library. The password is the name of the oak tree we planted together. You'll find everything you need there." My heart pounded as I finished the letter. The story wasn't just about Chloe's greed. It was about a deeper conspiracy, a web of workplace betrayal and toxic relationships that had poisoned everything David had built. The realization hit me like a wave. This wasn't just a family conflict. It was a battle for David's legacy, a fight to expose the truth and bring everyone involved to justice. I called Emily and Mr. Harris, sharing the contents of the letter. Together, we retrieved David's old laptop from storage, dusting it off like an ancient artifact. I typed in the password Quercus, the Latin name for oak, a nod to our shared love of history and the tree we'd planted so many years ago. Inside, we found a trove of files, emails, financial records, meeting notes, and a journal David had kept during his final months. The evidence was damning. There were messages between Chloe and a senior executive at the company, plotting to siphon funds and sell proprietary technology to a competitor. There were records of secret meetings, offshore accounts, and coded messages that only made sense in the context of David's journal. as we pieced together the puzzle. The full scope of the betrayal became clear. Chloe had been the face of the scheme, but she'd had help from inside, someone who had used their position to cover her tracks and manipulate the board. The conspiracy had cost the company millions, jeopardized jobs, and nearly destroyed everything David had worked for. The weight of it all was overwhelming. I felt anger, yes, but also a deep sense of responsibility. This was no longer just about revenge or even justice, sir, for my own sake. It was about protecting the people who still depended on David's company, about making sure that the truth came out and that those responsible were held accountable, that we took the new evidence to the authorities, launching a second investigation, this time into the company itself. The process was grueling, filled with interviews, audits, and legal battles. But with every new revelation, the case grew stronger. The senior executive was arrested, charged with fraud and conspiracy. The company's board was forced to resign, and a new leadership team was brought in to restore trust and stability. Through it all, I felt David's presence guiding me. His words echoed in my mind. Family is worth protecting, even when it hurts. I realized that my fight wasn't just about avenging the past. It was about building a future where honesty, integrity, and compassion mattered more than greed and ambition. But as the dust settled and the company began to heal, I couldn't help but wonder what other secrets were still hidden, waiting to be uncovered. The fallout from the investigation was immediate and far-reaching. News of the scandals spread quickly, not just through our town but across the industry. Headlines blared about the Peterson betrayal, and the story became a case study in corporate greed, family drama, and the dangers of broken trust. For weeks, reporters camped outside the company's headquarters, eager for any new detail about the pro-revenge story that had captivated the public. I watched it all unfold with a strange mix of satisfaction and sorrow. On one hand, justice was finally being served. The people who had conspired to destroy David's legacy were being held accountable, their reputations in ruins. On the other hand, I couldn't help but mourn what had been lost: the sense of family, the trust, the simple joy of building something together. The company was saved, but the cost had been high. The new leadership team moved quickly to repair the damage. They reached out to employees, assuring them that the days of toxic relationships and backroom deals were over. They implemented new policies, increased transparency, and made it clear that the company's future would be built on integrity, not betrayal. Slowly, morale began to improve. People started to believe in the mission again, to feel proud of the work they were doing. I was invited to speak at a company town hall, to share my perspective and help the healing process. Standing on that stage, looking out at the faces of people who had been caught in the crossfire of this family conflict, I felt a deep sense of responsibility. I told them about David, about his passion, his vision, his belief that technology could change lives for the better. I spoke about the importance of trust, of standing up for what's right even when it's hard. I reminded them that every company, every family, is only as strong as the values it upholds. Afterward, employees approached me with stories of their own stories of betrayal, of workplace drama, of moments when they'd felt powerless. Some thanked me for fighting back, for showing that even the most satisfying stories of revenge are really about justice and redemption. Others simply wanted to share their grief, to let me know that David's legacy still mattered, but not everyone was ready to move on. There were still whispers in the hallways, rumors about who had known what, who had looked the other way. Some people left, unable to face the memories of what had happened. Others stayed, determined to rebuild. The company was forever changed, but it was still standing as a testament to the power of truth and the resilience of those who refused to give up. Outside of work, my life settled into a new rhythm. I continued my work with the trust, expanding its reach and impact. We launched new scholarship programs, funded community projects, and partnered with organizations dedicated to fighting fraud and promoting ethical leadership. Every success felt like a small victory, a way to honor David and ensure that his story would be remembered for more than just its tragic ending. But the ripple effect of Chloe's betrayal continued to spread. I received letters from people, I had never met strangers who had read about the case and wanted to share their own experiences with family drama, inheritance disputes, and the pain of broken trust. Some sought advice. Others simply wanted to be heard. I responded to as many as I could, offering words of encouragement and reminding them that they weren't alone. One letter, in particular, stood out. It was from a young man named Alex, whose father had been swindled out of his business by a trusted partner. Alex wrote about the anger and helplessness he'd felt, the desire for revenge, and the struggle to find closure. He asked me how I'd managed to keep going, how I'd found the strength to fight back when everything seemed lost. I thought about his question for a long time. The truth was, I hadn't always been strong. There were days when I wanted to give up, when the weight of betrayal and loss felt unbearable. But I'd kept going because I believed in something bigger than myself, because I wanted to honor David, to protect his legacy, and to prove that justice could still be served. Even in a world that often seems unfair, I wrote back to Alex, sharing my story and encouraging him to keep fighting for what was right. I told him that revenge can be satisfying, but true healing comes from standing up for your values, from building something good out of the ashes of what was lost. I reminded him that every act of courage, no matter how small, can create ripples that change the world. But as I sealed the envelope and sent it off, I couldn't shake the feeling that my own story wasn't finished. There were still unanswered questions, still shadows lurking in the corners of my life. The past had a way of reaching out, of reminding me that some wounds take longer to heal than others. And then, one evening, I received a phone call that would change everything again. The phone rang just as I was finishing dinner, the sun setting in a blaze of orange outside my window. I almost didn't answer after everything. I'd grown wary of unknown numbers, but something told me to pick up. The voice on the other end was unfamiliar, but urgent. "Mr. Peterson?" The caller asked, their tone cautious. "My name is Rachel. I'm an attorney representing a group of former employees from David's company. They come forward with new information that wasn't uncovered in the initial investigation. They asked me to reach out to you directly." My heart skipped a beat. After all the betrayal stories, the courtroom drama, the pro-revenge moments, I thought I'd seen it all. But the idea that there were still secrets buried in the past sent a chill down my spine. Rachel explained that several employees had been too afraid to speak up during the first investigation. Now, with the company under new leadership and Chloe's influence gone, they felt safe enough to share what they knew. There were allegations of harassment, intimidation, and even blackmail evidence that Chloe and her co-conspirators had used threats to keep people silent. Some had lost their jobs. Others had been forced to sign non-disclosure agreements under duress. But toxic relationships and family drama that had poisoned my life had seeped into the company, leaving a trail of broken trust and shattered dreams. I agreed to meet Rachel and her clients at her office the next day. As I drove through the city, I felt a familiar mix of dread and determination. I thought the worst was behind me, but it was clear that the story of Chloe's betrayal was still unfolding. I reminded myself that justice served isn't always a single event. It's a process, a commitment to seeing things through, no matter how long it takes. Rachel's office was a modest suite in a downtown building, the kind of place where people go when they have nowhere else to turn. Inside, I found a group of men and women, some young, some older, all carrying the weight of secrets they'd held for too long. They greeted me with a mixture of relief and apprehension, as if unsure whether I was friend or foe. One by one, they shared their stories. There was Mark, a software engineer who'd been fired after refusing to falsify data for a major client. There was Linda, a project manager who had been bullied into silence after discovering financial irregularities. There was even a janitor, Miguel, who'd overheard late-night meetings between Chloe and the executive who'd been arrested. Each story was a piece of the puzzle, another example of the petty revenge and workplace betrayal that had festered under the surface. I listened. I felt a surge of anger not just at Chloe, but at myself for not seeing the signs sooner. I'd been so focused on my own pain, my own quest for justice, that I hadn't realized how many others had suffered in silence. The family conflict that had torn my life apart had left scars on dozens of people, each with their own story of loss and betrayal. Rachel handed me a folder filled with affidavits, emails, and internal memos. "We want to make this right," she said. "But we need your help. You're the only one with the credibility and the platform to bring this to light. If you're willing, we'd like you to speak on our behalf to help us tell the world what really happened." I hesitated, the weight of responsibility settling on my shoulders. I'd already fought one battle, already paid a heavy price for my pursuit of justice. But as I looked around the room, I saw the same determination in their eyes that had carried me through my darkest days. They weren't asking for revenge, they were asking for truth, for closure, for the chance to rebuild their lives. I agreed to help, promising to use my voice and my story to shine a light on the darkness that had plagued the company. Together, we began to plan a press conference, gathering evidence and preparing statements. The process was exhausting, but also cathartic, a way to turn pain into purpose, to transform a story of betrayal into one of hope and resilience. As the date of the press conference approached, I felt a renewed sense of purpose. I wasn't just fighting for myself anymore, I was fighting for everyone who had been hurt by Chloe's actions, for everyone who had ever been silenced by fear or intimidation. The story had grown beyond a simple tale of family drama and revenge. It had become a movement, a call for accountability and change. But as the day of the press conference dawned, I received another message, this one anonymous, threatening, and chilling in its simplicity. "Stop, or you'll regret it." I stared at the words, my resolve hardening. I knew that standing up for justice would come at a cost. But I also knew that some things are worth fighting for, no matter the risk. The anonymous threat echoed in my mind. I barely slept, replaying every word, every possible scenario. Was it just a scare tactic, or was someone truly desperate enough to try to silence me? I'd read enough revenge stories and betrayal tales to know that when people are cornered, they can become dangerous. But I also knew that backing down now would mean letting fear win, and I'd come too far for that. The next morning, I met with Rachel and a group of former employees. I showed them the message, and their faces darkened with concern. "We need to be careful," Rachel said, her voice steady but tense. "But we can't let them intimidate us. If we stay silent, nothing will ever change." We decided to move forward with the press conference, but with extra precautions. Rachel contacted the police, who agreed to have officers present at the event. We also arranged for security at the venue and made sure everyone involved knew how to report any suspicious activity. The sense of camaraderie among us grew stronger. There's a unique bond that forms when people unite against a common enemy, especially in the face of toxic relationships and workplace betrayal. The day of the press conference arrived, and the air was thick with anticipation. Reporters filled the room, cameras flashing, microphones poised. I stood at the podium, my heart pounding, but my voice steady. I began by telling my story, how a family conflict had spiraled into a battle for justice, how betrayal had nearly destroyed everything I loved, and how, through patience and persistence, we had uncovered the truth. Then, one by one, the former employees stepped forward to share their experiences. Their voices trembled at first, but grew stronger with each word. They spoke of intimidation, of being forced to choose between their jobs and their integrity, of the emotional toll living in fear. The room was silent, the weight of their stories settling over everyone present. As the press conference ended, reporters rushed forward with questions. The story spread quickly, making headlines across the country. Social media exploded with support for the whistleblowers, and calls for further investigation poured in. The company's new leadership responded swiftly, launching an internal review and pledging to make amends for the past. But not everyone was pleased. That evening, I received another message, this one more direct, more personal. "You think you've won, but you have no idea what you've started. Back off, or you'll lose everything." I took the message to the police, who assured me they were investigating. But the fear lingered, a constant shadow at the edge of my thoughts. I started looking over my shoulder, double-checking the locks on my doors and making sure I wasn't being followed. The sense of vulnerability was overwhelming, but I refused to let it paralyze me. Instead, I leaned into the support of those around me. The former employees checked in regularly, offering words of encouragement and solidarity. Rachel became not just an attorney, but a friend and a steady presence in the storm. Even strangers reached out, sharing their own stories of betrayal and revenge, reminding me that I wasn't alone. Through it all, I kept my focus on the bigger picture. This wasn't just about me or even about David's legacy. It was about creating a culture of accountability, about making sure that no one else would have to suffer in silence. The trust expanded its mission, funding programs to support whistleblowers and promote ethical leadership in business. We partnered with advocacy groups, hosted workshops, and provided resources for those facing similar battles. But the threats didn't stop. Each new message was a reminder that the fight for justice is never easy, that there are always those who will try to protect their own interests at any cost. I knew I was making enemies, but I also knew I was making a difference. One night, as I sat alone in my apartment, I received a call from an unknown number. The voice on the other end was familiar but strained. "Robert, it's Chloe." My breath caught in my throat. I hadn't spoken to her since the day she lost everything. Her voice was shaky, almost desperate. "I need to see you. There are things you don't know, things I need to tell you, before it's too late." I hesitated, every instinct telling me to hang up. But something in her tone of fear, regret, maybe even a hint of remorse made me pause. "Meet me tomorrow?" she whispered. "Please, it's important." As I hung up, my mind raced with questions. Was this another trap? Another attempt at manipulation? Or was Chloe finally ready to face the consequences of her actions and tell the truth? I knew one thing for certain. The next day would bring answers I wasn't sure I was ready to hear. The next morning, I woke before dawn, my mind restless with anticipation and dread. I replayed Chloe's voice in my head, searching for any sign of deception or sincerity. After everything she'd done, the betrayal, the lies, the toxic family drama, I had every reason to doubt her. But I also knew that sometimes the most satisfying stories of justice served come from hearing the truth, no matter how painful. We agreed to meet at a small park on the edge of town, a place far from the prying eyes of reporters and the whispers of neighbors. The sky was overcast, the air heavy with the promise of rain. I arrived early, sitting on a bench beneath the old oak trees, my heart pounding with a mix of anger and curiosity. Chloe arrived a few minutes later, looking nothing like the woman who had once strutted through my home with an air of invincibility. She was thinner, her hair pulled back in a simple ponytail, her clothes plain and wrinkled. She looked tired and haunted. Even, for a moment, I almost felt sorry for her. She sat down beside me, her hands trembling in her lap. For a long time, neither of us spoke. The silence between us was thick with all of the things that had gone unsaid for too long. Finally, Chloe broke the silence. "I know you have no reason to trust me," she began, her voice barely above a whisper. "But I need you to listen." "Not for me, David." I nodded, keeping my guard up, but willing to hear her out. She took a shaky breath. "I made mistakes. Terrible mistakes. I let greed and anger control me. I thought I could outsmart everyone, that I deserved everything David built. But I was wrong. I lost everything. My friends, my reputation, my future. And I know I hurt you more than anyone." Her words hung in the air, heavy with regret. I wanted to lash out to remind her of all the pain she'd caused, but I held back. This was her moment to confess, to finally take responsibility for her actions. "There's more you need to know," she continued, her eyes filling with tears. "I wasn't the only one involved. After David got sick, I was approached by people from the company who promised me security if I helped them. They pressured me, threatened me, made me believe I had no choice. At first, I went along with it for the money, but then got out of control. I was in too deep to back out." She handed me a small flash drive. "Everything is on here. Emails, bank records, names. I kept it as insurance in case they ever turned on me. But I can't carry this anymore." I want to help you finish what you started. I want to make things right, if that's even possible." I took the flash drive, my hand shaking. The weight of her confession was overwhelming. For so long, I'd seen Chloe as the villain in my revenge story, the architect of my suffering. But now, I saw her as something more complicated. A woman who had made terrible choices. Yes, but who was also a victim of manipulation and fear. "Why now?" I asked quietly. She looked away, wiping her eyes. "Because I can't live with the guilt anymore. And because I'm scared. The people behind this, they're dangerous. They don't care who gets hurt. I thought I could control them, but I was wrong." We sat in silence for a while, the rain beginning to fall in soft, steady drops. I realized that this was the closure I'd been searching for. Not just revenge, but the truth. Chloe's confession didn't erase the pain she'd caused, but it gave me a new sense of purpose. There was still work to be done, still justice to be served, not just for me, but for everyone who had been caught in the web of betrayal and greed. As Chloe stood to leave, she paused, her voice trembling. "I'm sorry, Robert. For everything." I watched her walk away, unsure if I'd ever see her again. But I knew that with the evidence she'd given me, I finally had the power to finish what David and I had started. But as I headed home, flash drive in hand, I couldn't shake the feeling that the most dangerous part of this story was still ahead. Back at my apartment, I stared at the flash drive Chloe had given me, feeling the weight of its secrets. I knew that what I was about to uncover could change everything, not just for me, but for everyone who had suffered because of the toxic relationships and betrayal that had poisoned David's company. I took a deep breath, plugged the drive into my laptop, and waited as the files loaded. The folders were meticulously organized, each one labeled with dates, names, and transaction amounts. There were hundreds of emails, bank statements, and confidential memos. As I scrolled through the documents, the full scope of the conspiracy became clear. Chloe hadn't exaggerated. The corruption ran deep, involving not just a few rogue employees, but a network of executives, outside investors, and even a few public officials who had looked the other way in exchange for favors. One email thread caught my eye. It was a conversation between Chloe and a man named Victor, a high-ranking executive who had been quietly pulling strings behind the scenes. The messages were chilling in their casual tone, discussing how to manipulate board votes, hide losses, and funnel money into offshore accounts. There were references to cleaning up loose ends and making sure the old man doesn't cause trouble. I realized with a jolt that I was the old man they were talking about. The evidence was overwhelming. There were wire transfers to shell companies, contracts signed under duress, and even surveillance reports on employees who had tried to blow the whistle. It was a classic case of workplace betrayal, but on a scale I'd never imagined. The more I read, the more I understood why Chloe had been so afraid and why she'd finally decided to come clean. I called Mr. Harris and Rachel, asking them to come over immediately. When they arrived, I showed them the files, watching as their expressions shifted from shock to grim determination. "This is enough to bring down everyone involved," Rachel said, her voice steady. "But it's also dangerous. These people have a lot to lose, and they won't go down without a fight." We spent hours making copies of the files, backing them up in secure locations. Mr. Harris contacted the authorities, arranging a meeting with federal investigators. The case had grown far beyond a simple family conflict or inheritance drama. It was now a matter of public interest, a story of corruption and greed that would rock the community to its core. As the investigation ramped up, I found myself living in a state of constant vigilance. I changed my routines, avoided familiar places, and kept my phone close at all times. The threats continued, growing more specific and menacing. One night, I found a note taped to my door. "You're in over your head. Walk away while you still can." But I refused to be intimidated. I'd spent too long letting fear dictate my actions. Now, with the truth finally within reach, I was determined to see justice served no matter the cost. I worked closely with the investigators, providing context for the documents and helping them connect the dots. The process was exhausting, but also strangely empowering. For the first time since David's death, I felt like I was taking control of my own story. The authorities moved quickly, executing search warrants and freezing accounts. News of the investigation spread like wildfire, and soon the media was camped outside my building, hungry for details. I gave a brief statement, careful not to reveal too much, but making it clear that this was about more than just revenge or family drama. This is about accountability, I said. It's about making sure that those who abuse their power are held responsible for their actions. The community's response was overwhelming. People reached out with messages of support, sharing their own stories of betrayal and injustice. The trust received a surge of donations, and volunteers offered to help with everything from legal research to community outreach. It was a reminder that even in the darkest times, there are always people willing to stand up for what's right. But as the investigation closed in on the ringleaders, the danger grew. I started noticing unfamiliar cars parked near my building, strangers watching from across the street. I knew I was being followed, but I refused to let it stop me. I'd come too far back down now. One evening, as I was leaving a meeting with the investigators, a car pulled up beside me. The window rolled down and a voice I recognized as Victor's hissed, "You don't know what you're doing, old man. This isn't just about money. People get hurt when they dig too deep." I stared at him, refusing to show fear. "Maybe it's time someone did." He glared at me for a moment, then sped off into the night. I knew the final confrontation was coming. The stakes had never been higher, but I was ready, because this time, I wasn't just fighting for myself, I was fighting for David, for everyone who had been betrayed, and for the future of a company that deserved a second chance. But as the investigation reached its climax, I realized that the most dangerous secrets were still waiting to be revealed. The days that followed were a blur of intradious, legal meetings and sleepless nights. The authorities moved swiftly, arresting several key players in the conspiracy. Victor, the executive who had threatened me, was taken into custody along with 2 board members and a handful of outside investors. The news sent shockwaves through the community and the industry. Headlines screamed about the Peterson Company scandal, and the story became a symbol of what happens when greed and betrayal go unchecked. But even as the arrests mounted, I knew the fight wasn't over. There were still loose ends, still whispers of deeper corruption. The investigators warned me to be careful. There were rumors that some of the people involved had ties to organized crime, and that they might try to silence anyone who threatened to expose them further. The sense of danger was real, but so was my resolve. I'd come too far to back down now. One evening, I received a call from Rachel. Her voice was tense. "Robert, we've uncovered something big. There's a hidden account, one that wasn't in the files Chloe gave you. It's tied to a shell company in the Cayman Islands, and it looks like it was used to funnel millions out of the company over the past 5 years. The account is still active, and someone's been trying to move the money since the investigation started." My heart pounded. "Do we know who's behind it?" "We have a name," she said. "But you're not going to like it." She sent me the documents, and as I opened the files, my blood ran cold. The account was in the name of someone I trusted for years, a family friend, someone who had been close to David since childhood. The betrayal cut deeper than anything Chloe had done. This wasn't just a story of workplace betrayal or toxic relationships. It was a reminder that sometimes the people who hurt us most are the ones we least expect. I met with the investigators, sharing everything I knew about the family friend. The evidence was damning: emails, wire transfers, even photos of secret meetings. The authorities moved quickly, arresting him before he could disappear with the money. The news hit me like a punch to the gut. I'd lost so much already: my son, my home, my sense of security. Now, I had to face the reality that even my closest relationships had been tainted by greed and deception. The trial that followed was long and grueling. I was called to testify, recounting the entire saga from the first days of David's illness to the final confrontation with Victor and the others. The courtroom was packed with reporters, former employees, and members of the community. The atmosphere was tense, every word weighed and scrutinized as I sat on the witness stand, I felt the weight of all the betrayal stories, all the family drama and broken trust that had brought me to this moment. But I also felt a sense of pride. I had survived. I had fought back. I had refused to let the darkness win. The verdict was swift and decisive. The conspirators were found guilty on all counts: fraud, embezzlement, conspiracy, and more. The judge's words echoed through the courtroom. This case is a reminder that justice, though sometimes slow, is inevitable. Those who betray the trust of others will be held accountable. The sense of relief was overwhelming. For the first time in years, I felt like I could breathe again. The company was safe, the trust was secure, and the people who had tried to destroy everything David and I had built were finally facing the consequences of their actions. But as I left the courthouse, I couldn't help but wonder what the future would hold. The scars of betrayal run deep, and the process of healing would take time. But I knew one thing for certain: I was no longer a victim. I was a survivor, a fighter, and a guardian of David's legacy. Yet, as I walked out into the sunlight, a single question lingered in my mind. Could I ever truly forgive those who had hurt me? Or would the shadow of betrayal follow me for the rest of my days? The weeks after the trial felt strangely quiet. The media frenzy faded, the reporters moved on to the next big scandal, and the courthouse that had once been the center of my world now stood silent. I found myself alone with my thoughts, wrestling with the aftermath of everything that had happened. The story of betrayal, revenge, and justice served had reached its climax. But the process of healing was only just beginning. I spent my days working with the trust, pouring my energy into projects that honored David's memory. We expanded our scholarship program, launched new initiatives for ethical leadership, and partnered with organizations that supported victims of workplace betrayal and family conflict. Every time I saw a young student receive a scholarship or a struggling family get the help they needed, I felt a small piece of my heart begin to mend. But the nights were harder. Alone in my apartment, I replayed the events of the past year. The loss, the humiliation, the anger, and the slow, methodical execution of revenge. I thought about Chloe, about Victor, about the family friend whose betrayal had cut so deeply. I wondered if I would ever be able to trust again, or if the scars of broken trust would always linger just beneath the surface. One evening, I received a letter from Chloe. It was handwritten, the script shaky but sincere. She apologized again for everything she had done, for the pain she had caused, and for the choices that had led her down such a dark path. She wrote about her time in therapy, about her efforts to rebuild her life, and about the lessons she had learned from her mistakes. She didn't ask for forgiveness, but she hoped that one day I might find her in my heart to let go of the anger. Reading her words, I felt a strange mix of emotions: anger, sadness, but also a glimmer of hope. Maybe in time we could both find peace. Maybe the cycle of toxic relationships and family drama could finally be broken. I also heard from some of the former employees who had testified at the trial. Many of them had found new jobs, started new lives, and were grateful for the chance to speak their truth. They thanked me for standing up to the corruption, for refusing to let fear or intimidation silence me. Their gratitude was humbling, a reminder that even the smallest acts of courage can have a ripple effect. But healing wasn't just about moving forward. It was about making sense of the past. I spent hours in the library, reading books on forgiveness, resilience, and the psychology of betrayal. I attended support groups, where I listened to others share their own stories of family conflict, workplace drama on the long road to recovery. I realized that my story was just one of many, that the pain of betrayal is universal, but so is the possibility of healing. One afternoon, as I walked through the park where I'd last seen Chloe, I found myself thinking about David. I remembered his laughter, his kindness, his unwavering belief in the goodness of people. I realized that the best way to honor his legacy wasn't through revenge or even justice served, but through compassion, forgiveness, and the quiet strength to keep going. I sat on a bench beneath the old oak tree, the same one we had planted together so many years ago. The branches swayed gently in the breeze, sunlight filtering through the leaves. For the first time in a long while, I felt a sense of peace, A sense that, despite everything, life could go on. But as I stood to leave, my phone buzzed with a new message, one that hinted at yet another secret from the past, waiting to be uncovered. I stared at my phone, the message glowing on the screen. It was from an unknown number, but the words were unmistakably personal. There's something you still don't know about David's last days. Meet me at the old cafe tonight. Come alone. My heart pounded. After everything, betrayal, revenge, justice served, and the long road to healing, I thought I had finally reached the end of this emotional storytelling journey. But the past, it seemed, wasn't finished with me yet. I debated whether to ignore the message, but curiosity and a lingering sense of unfinished business won out. I texted back a simple, "I'll be there." The cafe was nearly empty when I arrived. Its faded wallpaper and chipped mugs, a stark contrast to the high-stakes drama that had defined my life for so long. I took a seat in the corner, scanning the room for anyone familiar. After a few minutes, a woman in her early 40s approached my table. She looked nervous, glancing over her shoulder before sitting down. "My name is Julia," she said quietly. "I worked with David during his last year. I was his nurse." I nodded, unsure where this was going. "Why contact me now?" She hesitated, then slid a small envelope across the table. "David asked me to give this to you if things ever got complicated. He knew there were things happening behind the scenes, things he couldn't stop. He wanted you to have the truth, no matter how hard it was to hear." With trembling hands, I opened the envelope. Inside was a letter in David's handwriting, along with a USB drive. The letter was short, but powerful. "Dad, if you're reading, yes, it means the world got darker before it got better. I want you to know I never gave up hope, not in you, not in the company, not in the idea that good people can make a difference. But I also knew that some secrets were too dangerous to share openly. The USB drive contains recordings and documents I gathered in my final months. I hope they help you finish what I couldn't." Julia watched me, her eyes filled with empathy. "David trusted you more than anyone. He wanted you to know that he fought until the very end, not just for the company, but for you." I thanked her, my voice thick with emotion. As she left, I sat in a quiet cafe, the weight of the envelope heavy in my hands. I realized that this was the final piece of the puzzle, the last chapter in a saga of family conflict, workplace betrayal, and the relentless pursuit of justice. Back at home, I plugged the USB drive into my laptop. The files were extensive: audio recordings of secret meetings, video clips of boardroom arguments, and a digital journal where David chronicled his suspicions and fears. There were names, dates, and details that filled in the gaps left by the earlier investigations. It was clear that David had known more than he let on, and that he had risked everything to protect the people he loved. Listening to his voice, hearing the pain and determination in his words, I felt a surge of pride and sorrow. David had been fighting a battle on multiple fronts against his illness, against betrayal, and against the toxic relationships that threatened to destroy everything he'd built. He hadn't just left a legacy of innovation and generosity. He'd left a blueprint for how to stand up to injustice, even when the odds seemed impossible. With this new evidence, I contacted Mr. Harris and Rachel. Together, we reviewed the files, realizing that there were still a few individuals who had escaped justice, people who had manipulated events from the shadows, always one step ahead. The recordings provided the missing links. The proof needed to bring them to account. The authorities reopened the case, and within weeks, the final conspirators were arrested. The story made headlines once again, but this time, it was about closure, about the triumph of truth over lies, and about the power of persistence in the face of overwhelming odds. But as the dust settled, I found myself reflecting on everything that had happened. The revenge stories, the betrayals, the moments of despair and hope, they had all led to this moment. I realized that while justice had finally been served, the true victory was in the lessons learned, the relationships rebuilt, and the legacy of courage and integrity that David had left behind. Yet, as I sat in the quiet of my apartment, I couldn't help but wonder what would I do with the rest of my life, now that the fight was finally over. The weeks after the final arrest felt lighter, somehow, as if a great weight had finally been lifted from my shoulders. For the first time in years, I could walk through the city without looking over my shoulder, without feeling the constant pressure of unfinished business. The story that had begun with betrayal and heartbreak had finally reached its conclusion, and I was left with the quiet, unfamiliar peace of a life no longer defined by conflict. I spent more time at the trust, mentoring young people who reminded me of David, curious, passionate, and determined to make a difference. We expanded our programs, offering not just scholarships but internships, mentorships, and workshops on ethics and leadership. The trust became a beacon in the community, a place where people could come for support, guidance, and hope. Every time I saw a student succeed, every time I watched a family find stability, I felt David's presence beside me, his legacy living on in every act of kindness and courage. But the journey hadn't just changed the world around me, it had changed me too. I found myself reaching out to old friends, rebuilding relationships that had been strained by years of family drama and toxic conflict. I apologized where I needed to, forgave where I could, and learned to let go of the anger that had once consumed me. The process wasn't easy, but it was necessary. Healing, I realized, is a choice, a daily commitment to move forward. Even when the past tries to pull you back, Chloe, too, found her own path to redemption. She completed her sentence, found steady work, and began volunteering at a local shelter. We spoke occasionally, our conversations cautious but honest. She never asked for forgiveness, but she worked to earn it, one small act at a time. I saw in her the possibility of change, the hope that even the most broken relationships can be rebuilt with time, effort, and humility. The company, once on the brink of collapse, flourished under new leadership. The culture shifted from one of fear and secrecy to one of transparency and collaboration. Employees who had once been silenced found their voices, and the company's reputation was slowly restored. The story of our struggle became a lesson taught in business schools, a reminder that justice served is not just about punishment, but about transformation and growth. As for me, I found a new sense of purpose. I began speaking at conferences, sharing my story with others who had faced betrayal, loss, and the long road to justice. I wrote articles, mentored survivors, and became an advocate for ethical leadership and family healing. The pain of the past never fully disappeared, but it no longer defined me. Instead, it became the foundation for something stronger, a life built on resilience, compassion, and the quiet satisfaction of knowing I'd done the right thing. One evening, as I sat beneath the old oak tree David and I had planted so many years ago, I reflected on everything that had happened, the revenge stories, the betrayals, the moments of despair and hope. They had all led me here, to a place of peace and possibility. I realized that the true measure of justice isn't found in the courtroom or the headlines, but in the lives we touch, the legacies we build, and the courage we show in the face of adversity. I looked up at the sky, the stars shining right above me, and felt a deep sense of gratitude. For David, for the people who had stood by me, for the chance to turn pain into purpose. I knew that life would never be perfect, that there would always be challenges and setbacks. But I also knew that I was no longer afraid. I had faced the worst and come out stronger on the other side. As I stood to leave, I thought about all the people who had reached out to me over the years, those who had shared their own stories of betrayal, revenge, and redemption. I realized that we are all connected by our struggles, that every act of courage, every moment of forgiveness, creates ripples that can change the world. So, to everyone listening, I want to ask you, tell me, do you think this revenge was fair? Or did they deserve even worse? Have you ever faced a betrayal that changed your life? How do you find your way back to hope? Share your thoughts in the comments below. Your voice matters. Your story matters. And together, we can build a world where justice isn't just a dream, but a reality for everyone. Thank you for being part of this journey. If you believe in the power of wisdom, patience, and true justice, please like this video and subscribe for more emotional storytelling, pro-revenge, and satisfying stories of family drama, karma, and redemption. This is Robert Peterson, signing off, not as a victim, but as a survivor, a father, and a believer in second chances.